Our next guest, you already know, is the voice of the Chicago Cubs since 1996. Before that, he was with the Brewers and the Twins. Hang on one moment.
Hello, John. How are you?
Hey, touchdown, Pat Hughes. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it so very much.
Happy to be here. And this is my first Zoom experience, John, so be gentle with me.
Of course I will. Two things I appreciate. Well, three, you being here at all. So thank you so much for that. You had told me before you even accepted the invitation, I'm probably going to be a few minutes late. You were not, so thank you for that. And then I know that you and my wife, Amy, were doing a lot of back and forth to make sure that we could get this to work technically. So thank you for your perseverance as well.
Happy to be here, John. Whatever you need, I'm ready to fire away.
That's awesome. Well, we're just going to jump straight to the questions. Our first one is from Jake Baskin. Go ahead, Jake. You're with Pat Hughes.
Hi, I call games for the Northeast Sports Network that covers Division III NESCAC athletics. I do a number of different sports. I have found one of the complaints I've been getting in sending tapes around, or one of the comments, is that I am too dull, which I understand. I can agree with that. I don't have the right voice to yell. But how would you go about building excitement when that's not necessarily in your nature?
Well, I think certain people are just born with certain energy levels, and I don't know. I feel like I have to emote and force sometimes when you're really tired. Let's say the Cubs have had a doubleheader the day before and day-nighter, and now you got a day game, and it's a big game, so you want to do your best. You really got to dig down and bring up all the energy you've got. So I don't know, maybe just try that the next time. Just dig down inside of you and pull out the most energy you can possibly muster up for a certain call or a certain game, and just see how that feels. Now, if it's not exhausting to you, maybe you'll want to broadcast at a slightly higher energy level. But I wouldn't change too much. I think one of the key things about play-by-play is being yourself. As much as possible, be yourself. And if that's good enough, then fine. If not, I don't really know what to tell you.
Jake, thank you for the question and for your patience. I appreciate it. Mike Hammett, my buddy. Mike, thank you for being here. Go ahead and state your affiliation and your question for the voice of the Cubs.
Hi, Pat. My name is Mike Hammett. I'm the radio voice for Louisiana Monroe baseball and women's basketball, and just finished what was a shortened second season here. My question deals with prep for baseball when you're going into a series and then within the series, day to day. What all does that entail for you? How do you go about that?
Good question, Mike. I think it would depend if you've seen the team already this year. You've already done some preparation. If you have not seen the team, it requires a little bit more prep. I think you want to see how they've done in the last week or so. Who are their hot hitters? Who are their top pitchers? You always focus on the starting pitchers for any game. How did they do their last time out? How has this pitcher done historically against the Cubs, and how has the Cubs pitcher done historically against this team? I always get batting average, homers, and RBIs. I don't necessarily read every single one, but if a guy does drive in a run in the third inning, you can immediately look down and say, that's his 41st RBI of the season, and the Cubs lead 4-2, or whatever it is. I believe in doing research. I don't believe in giving too many statistics. I think if you give too many numbers, well, let's put it this way, Mike. I think the more numbers you give, the less each one of them means. And the fewer ones that you give, the more they can mean. You want people to understand the numbers. For example, you don't want to just, if a pitcher comes in from the bullpen, you don't want to just say, he's pitched 71 innings, he's given up 78 hits, he's walked 28, and he struck out 42. Those numbers mean nothing. What you want to do is maybe pick out one number on his pitching line. For example, here comes Larry Davis coming into pitch. He's worked 78 innings. He's given up only 2 home runs all season long. Now here we go, his first pitch. That way, you know that he has not given up many home runs. You haven't given a lot of meaningless stats, and you've given a stat that really is significant. So, but as far as preparation, you do some team prep, some individual prep. Don't try to overdo it, and don't force in the preparation notes unless the situation calls for it. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you, Mike. I muted his mic, but yeah, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Let's go now to somebody who I will not be at all surprised to see in a big league baseball booth one day in the not too distant future, Sam Levitt. Sam, thank you for being here, man. Go ahead and state your affiliation and your question for Pat.
All right. Thanks, John. Hey, Pat. My name is Sam Levitt. I am the voice of the San Diego Padres AA team in Amarillo, Texas. Call a number of other sports on digital networks and some TV platforms in the Midwest, actually based out of Chicago during the rest of the year. This past season in 2019, I had the chance to call some pretty big moments for my baseball team with a lot of crowd energy, championship moments, big playoff moments. And, we talk so much about athletes and baseball players slowing down the game to see things more clear and improve their decision-making. I wanted to get your philosophy on that as a broadcaster, when it's a big moment, when the crowd is loud, when you have a producer in your ear, things are tense, there's a million things whirling around you. Sometimes I felt a little bit sped up in those moments, and maybe I miss a detail here or there, or don't execute the call or the play-by-play as well as I would have liked. How do you, from a mental standpoint, Pat, keep your cool so you can execute your job to the best of your ability in those big moments where there's a lot of madness going on?
It's a great question, Sam, and it's one that requires a lot of experience and a lot of practice. And don't expect that your first big moment is going to be a great call. I know mine wasn't, and I doubt that many announcers make great calls when they're real young and they've only done it one or two times. With experience, you'll find that you'll learn how to stay calm, call the play. Now, I do radio. You mentioned there's a producer in your ear. There's never a producer in my ear. On radio, we are the whole broadcast. It's Ron Coomer, my great partner, and myself. So I don't worry about that. That's an issue that's a television issue and not a radio one. But on radio, just stay calm, call the play. We had the great thrill and honor of calling the final out of the World Series for the Cubs over the Indians back in 2016. And people were saying, well, did you plan out word for word what you were going to say? And I said, well, no, I think that's a slippery slope, because let's look at two different scenarios. One would have the Cubs leading 11-0. That's one feeling. The other would be a cliffhanger extra inning game, which is what we had in Cleveland that night, and that's a completely different feeling. So I would say in those big moments, never try to plan out exactly what you're going to say, because if you do, Sam, it might be appropriate for one of those moments, but inappropriate for the other. So that would be a thought there. And then simply be true to your radio audience. That's what I do. That's my frame of reference. Call the play, and then, whatever naturally comes to mind, that would be what you'd want to go for. So I hope I answered that question. But experience, you'll find, will play a big role in being able to calm down and just call the action and call it exactly the way you want to call it.
Sam, thank you for the question. Again, I appreciate you being here. Also appreciate Larry Larson being here. So Larry, why don't you go ahead and announce your affiliation and pitch your question to Pat.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Larry Larson, sophomore at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. I'm also the voice of the Rockford Rivets Northwoods League baseball team, summer collegiate ball. Pat, honestly, you're probably the reason I want to go into broadcasting. I grew up listening to you and Ron Santo. And that brings me to my question. How do you go about working with color commentators who aren't necessarily broadcasters by trade? How do you keep it together in the booth when they're pretty much hilarious? Because I know you and Ron had a lot of hilarious moments.
That's a great question, Larry. I think whenever you well, first of all, when you're putting together a demo tape, And I think all of the guys, John, in your group here today, are going to be putting together demo reels or demo recordings. So I would say always include on the demo a section of the recording where you are working with another person. So many booths these days are 2 and even 3-man booths. So good question, Larry. I think that part of my job in a 2-man format, and I've worked with Ron Santo and Bob Euchre and Keith Moreland, and I worked with Al McGuire in basketball, and now with Ron Coomer, and I've been lucky. I love all these guys. But I think part of your job each day when you go to the booth, you think about your partner, you think about his background, his knowledge. You want to get that knowledge on the broadcast. So it goes from your tongue into his ear, and then he talks into the ears of the audience, if that makes any sense. But try to tap into him. And when he says something, especially if it's something funny, go ahead and play with it. You know, bat it right back to him and toss it up in the air and have fun with it. I'm a firm believer that 2-man booths should be guys talking to each other and listening to each other and having fun with each other. So that would be part of it. With a guy like Santo, with an outrageous personality and fun and laughing and crazy and all that, part of it is just to get that on the air and let the audience enjoy it. So it doesn't take any real preparation. It's more reaction to a guy like Santo. But when it first happened, like when he would scream over a call in the first year or two that we were working, I would think, who is this guy? And where is that coming from? I learned to live with it, and then I learned to have fun with it. And, we ended up having 15 years together, very memorable, and they tell us it was a unique chemistry, and I know the ratings were very, healthy, and it was profitable for the radio station and all that. But the key is to work directly with a guy. Get his humor on the air. Get his knowledge. Let's talk about technique. When a guy bobbles a ground ball, what did he do wrong? What could he have done different? Why didn't the Cubs turn a double play on that ball? So ask him questions. When the count goes to 2-2 and the ball game's on the line, it's the 7th inning with the bases loaded. Larry, you might go to your color announcer, what pitch is in your mind right now? If you're batting, what pitch are you looking for? If you're on the mound, what pitch might you throw to get this guy out? So anyway, I hope that answers your question, but it's a good question, and I think that, like I said, very few formats these days are solo one-man radio play-by-play efforts. Most of them are 2. Television many times has 3. So it's very important to learn how to work with others.
Spencer Dupuis, thank you for waiting patiently. Go ahead and ask your question of Pat.
Oh, well, Pat, thanks for coming on today and just spreading your wealth of knowledge. I was wondering what your thought would be for someone that is graduating in hopefully by the end of this pandemic, but I know I've been talking to a lot of people that I know within the industry, that especially the radio industry that I'm going into specifically, that a couple people suggested me to go to grad school potentially for marketing or something else, just because of trying to find a job even after this might be hard because of the radio industry being hit by loss of ad revenue. What are your thoughts to me on that?
You're right. It's Spencer, correct?
Yes.
Spencer, yes, it's a very difficult time. Broadcasting, though, you have to keep in mind, is always ultra competitive, especially as you get to the higher levels. Breaking in is one of the most daunting things that a young guy can do, but you can do it. You may have to go to a small market, and you may have to call high school basketball games in a small town, wherever, to get started, but that's great experience. I tell people who want to go into play-by-play, don't think about making a lot of money early in the first 5 or 10 years. The payoff will come when you are successful, when you polish your craft, when you become good enough so that people want you to be the voice of their team. So don't worry about the money you might make early. But I was willing to go to a very small town before I was lucky enough to get hired by the San Jose Missions when I was a senior in college at the age of 23. but I was willing to go to a town called Eureka up in Northern California. I was going to be the cameraman, the producer, the writer, the on-air talent, and I was going to be the editor. So I think I'm sure that there are differences between now and then, but I think there are some similarities too. And you might have to go to a real small market, but right now you just want to get experience. You want to improve, you want to practice, you want to get better. Make sure today's broadcast is better than yesterday's. Make sure tomorrow is better than today's.
Spencer, thank you for the question. Let's go to a longtime buddy of mine, Marshall Kellner. Hi, Marshall. Good to have you here, man. What's your question?
Hey, John. Thanks for organizing this. I am the play-by-play voice of the Fort Myers Mighty Muscles, the Class A advanced affiliate of the Twins in Florida, and also do the PA announcing for Twins spring training. My question, Pat, is how do you take care of your voice so that you don't lose it or that it doesn't diminish in quality throughout a long season, especially later in the season or later in games?
Marshall, it's a good question. A lot of good questions today, by the way, so thank you guys. I think a lot of it is common sense. Don't ever try to scream too loud. Don't try to scream over the crowd noise, for example. That would be a good thought. I don't smoke. If you guys smoke, I would stop. Smoking will hurt your voice. I gave up drinking, not that I was ever a big drinker, but I've actually had 4 surgeries on my vocal cords in the last 5 years. Nothing, I don't know that broadcasting had anything to do with it, but I have a disease called dysplasia. It comes and goes. Right now, thanks, it's in remission. It's a precancerous thing. I have a great surgeon. He goes in there and cleans it up as necessary. But I don't drink, I don't smoke, I work out, I run, I do a lot of common sense stuff. I try to eat right. So a lot of it is just genetics and good luck or bad luck. And I've been very lucky. Even though I have this disease and it may come back, I have this great doctor that I'll go to and he'll clean it up again. And I'm going to knock on wood and just keep on going. But I would say you can do exercises with your voice. Get up to the high notes and the lows right before you go on. Just kind of see the range of your voice on a given day. But those are some of the things. I always drink room temperature water during a ball game. About every 2 or 3 minutes, I'll take a little swig. Don't make it too cold. I've never been a coffee drinker during a broadcast. So that seems to work for me, and I hope it works for you.
Let's go next to Joe Vasile. Joe, I'm trying to unmute your mic here. I don't think Joe is handy. Let's go to Rick Johnston. Hey, Rick, good to have you here, man. What's your question for Pat?
Hey, John, thanks. Hi, Mr. Hughes. My name is Rick Johnston. I'm the play-by-play announcer at Taylor University. We're an NAI school in Upland, Indiana. And my question is, how do you make sure you don't repeat certain nuggets and tidbits about Cubs players throughout the whole length of the season?
That's a good question again. Rick, I wouldn't worry about that. As broadcasters, we like to think that fans tune into the broadcast at the start of every game and they listen to all 9 innings, maybe even the pregame and the postgame, and they're going to do the same thing the next day. They're going to listen all 9 innings. I tell my partners, I say, don't worry about repeating yourself. You don't want to be too redundant in any one broadcast, but if you told a story last week or 2 weeks ago, don't worry about telling it again. You might just say, I have told this story in the past, but I'm going to tell it again. I tell my partners, I say, people are coming and going. They're listening for a while, then they're going to the hardware. Then they're going to listen for a while, then they're going to take a lunch break. Then they're going to take a nap. Then they're going to listen for a little more. So don't be self-conscious about repeating stories or anecdotes or statistical data. Again, you don't want to say the same thing 3 or 4 times in one broadcast, but don't worry about, for example, in a 4-game series, Rick, that's a lot of time to fill. You might in some manner say basically the same note all 4 days. But it's okay. You're going to have a different audience, chances are, each time you tell it. So don't worry about that.
Thank you, Rick. Let's go to Anthony Rifenburg. Anthony, glad you're here. Thank you for that. Go ahead with your question for Pat.
Yeah. Hey, John. It's good to see you again. Hope you've been well since December when I last saw you. But my name is Anthony Rifenburg. I'm the media relations and broadcast assistant for AAA El Paso Chihuahuas, the affiliate for the Padres. I did 5 years of college baseball while I was in college. And my question is this: I talked a little bit about it with John in December when I saw him, and I've also talked to it with Tim Haggerty with the Chihuahuas. But, being in the big leagues yourself, which I know is the ultimate goal for me, and I know is probably for more than half of the people here as well, what, in your opinion, do you think it is that big league, broadcast folks that make the hires there are kind of looking for? What makes you stand out as an applicant in terms of your resume or your experience or whatever you may be, so that, any of us here can kind of strive for, what they're looking for and what will make us the most successful in their eyes?
Very good, Anthony, and good luck to you. I tell guys, if you want to be a big league announcer, go for it. Don't let the overwhelming odds against you be intimidating, because anything worthwhile is going to be very competitive, so don't worry about that. If you've got the talent and the passion and you're willing to put in the work, you can do it. I'm living proof that a guy without any athletic background to speak of, I played 1 year of college basketball, I knew nobody. My father was a college professor. He was not a manager of a baseball team in the minor leagues. I knew nobody in the business. I was not a great athlete, like I said. I started in college. I started practicing doing play-by-play, and I was completely dedicated. I think that's what you need to be, first of all. You have to practice over and over and over. If you want to be a baseball radio man, like I always did, I would say you have to do at least 100 to 200 ball games before you start feeling comfortable and can really start to develop a style. And then I would say constantly read as much as you can. One thing that really helped me when I was in college, I was a referee and an umpire. And I did those jobs to help put myself through college, but it also allowed me to learn the rules, which has turned out invaluable. You learn the rules of baseball and basketball and football, and it's amazing how many times in a broadcast a rule comes up, and I know the rule because I was an umpire 40 years ago. So that would be something. I would read as much as I can, read history, read books, go online and read about the 1975 World Series between the Boston Red Sox and the Cincinnati Reds, or whatever. You can always bring up little references. So I would say read, practice, learn the rules of games, listen to other announcers. You don't want to ever copy any one announcer, but you can get good ideas from virtually everyone. Some guys, to be honest with you, Anthony, you will listen to them and you'll learn what you don't want to do. And I don't mean that to be critical, but you'll learn, you'll say, that doesn't sound good, I'm not going to do that. Or I like the way he called that 2-run double into the left field corner. I like the way he did that. So you can borrow, the old saying is, it's almost a joke, if you copy from one person, it's called plagiarism. If you copy from several people, it's called research.
I like that. Let's go next to Jack Hillgrove. Thanks for hanging in, Jack. What's your question for the voice of the Cubs?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Pat. I'm Jack Hillgrove. I'm a junior at Waynesburg University. It's an hour south of Pittsburgh in southwestern PA. Pat, actually, my academic advisor at Waynesburg is the former voice of the Pirates. I'm sure you're familiar with Lanny for Gary.
Gentlemen, said hi, yes.
I will. I'll see him tomorrow. I'll virtually see him tomorrow. My question for you is about vocabulary. How essential is it to an aspiring broadcaster, to broadcasters in general, to have a complex and different vocabulary? And how does one improve on finding different ways to describe plays?
Do you mean a voluminous vocabulary?
Exactly. The whole point of
Jack,
my question.
I love words. I think that's another thing that's very important. you want to have as many different ways to describe things as possible. I learned from the great Bill King. He was a radio man for the Oakland Raiders and the Golden State Warriors and then the Oakland A's. He had a massive vocabulary, and he was so interesting, but he would say words, and I would immediately go to the dictionary and look them up. But one time a guy swished one from the corner in basketball, and the net draped over the side of the room. He said, they have to get somebody up there to extricate the net very meticulously. And I thought, boy, that's pretty good. So vocabulary is extremely important. And there was a previous questioner regarding how will you stand out among 150 applicants for a job. I would say if you use impressive vocabulary, but not too, what would be the word, not too pronounced. You don't want to be talking down to the audience, but like Bob Costas, I know he was part of the program earlier today. Bob is brilliant. I think he's the best broadcaster in the history of our country. The way he expresses himself, his vocabulary is impressive, but you always understand exactly what he's saying. So you don't want to use big words. I know Howard Cosell was guilty of that. There would be a camera shot of Don Shula, and he would say, look at him, he's implacable. Well, it's a good word, but I had no idea what it meant. I had to go to the dictionary and look it up. So I think you got to be careful. Use good vocabulary, but don't use words that are too esoteric so that the average person doesn't know what they are.
Good question, Jack. Next up, my buddy, Brian Crozier. Hey, Brian, what's your question for Pat?
Well, thank you so much, John and Pat. And I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, and I've been listening to Pat ever since he joined the Cubs in '96. So this is a thrill for me to be able to ask Pat a question. When you're going through a season, Pat, there are obviously ebbs and flows, and you're in the clubhouse every day, and you get to talk with some of the players and the manager and all that. And how does that affect your preparation from game to game, week to week? And then also, just quickly, when a shocking moment happens in a baseball game, I know in baseball you have 2 hours where not very much is happening, and then maybe 10 minutes where all the action happens. But when a shocking moment happens, how do you handle that?
Very good, Brian, and thank you. And just so I heard that you said you were a Cub fan, I'm going to say something right now. The Chicago Cubs win the World Series. I've been wanting to say that ever since I joined you guys a few minutes ago. So anyway, no, I think the shocking moments, and you pointed out something very important. The reason baseball on the radio and football and basketball on the radio are very challenging is because you have to completely paint the picture every single minute. And in baseball, as you pointed out, you can go 90 minutes with relative inactivity. Nothing's happening. It's a low-scoring game, a lot of deep counts, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks. That's the challenge. Everyone thinks, and I don't know why they do. Well, I do know why they do, because they've never done it. People who don't do play-by-play seem to think that baseball on the radio is the easiest thing to do, because we all have played baseball. We all know where second base is. We know where left field is. Anyone can keep the count, 1 ball, 2 strikes, 2-2. But it's because there is no action going on that makes it such a challenge. Trust me, I've done all sports, radio and television. Baseball on the radio is the most difficult. And I don't say that just because that's my job. It is extremely difficult to do it well. But how do you handle, you're ready at all times, Brian. That would be the answer to your question in a nutshell. You're always ready. You're always alert. Even though nothing has happened for an hour, there may be this crazy play right now where the ball gets thrown around, a guy misses a base, he goes back to tag it, they throw that ball away. Now there's 2 guys standing on third base. You got to be ready, and you've got to call it. I read Dick Enberg's book, and he said in a crazy play, here are a couple of things to remember. Where is the ball, and where is the lead runner? You can't go wrong. Where is the lead runner, and where is the ball? And then fill in the other data as you have time. So I hope that answers your question. And go Cubs.
That's a valuable nugget. Thank you for sharing that, Pat. Andrew Haynes. Andrew, I'm glad to see you here. Thank you. What is your question for Pat Hughes?
Yeah, thanks, John, for hosting this. Pat, thanks for coming on, and great to be able to talk to you. I do the radio for the Texas Longhorn softball team and the Dodgers rookie ball affiliate up in Ogden, Utah, the Raptors. So basically everything I do is working solo. You were talking about you're working in a 2 or 3 man booth for the most part a couple minutes ago. When you're working solo and you know, maybe you mentioned not playing, you know, at least baseball at a high level, played some basketball. You know, I didn't play baseball at a high level. I know a lot about the game, but the intricate details of what they might be planning to throw next, when to put on a steal or hit and run, I'm not quite always, you know, guessing that right. How much should I try to analyze when I'm on the air, when I'm solo, and before something happens, as opposed to just going back and describing it later?
I would say only as you are comfortable, Andrew. If you are pretty sure about something, go ahead and go with it. If you're not, I would hold off. And the word experience comes to mind here again. Once you've done 1,000 games, or in my case, I've been lucky enough to cover over 6,000 big league games, and it's going to be my 25th year with the Cubs. So, I mean, you see things over and over and over, and you kind of have an idea. But I don't work solo anymore, so it's not really an issue with me. I always, though, defer to my great partner, Ron Coomer, and I'm always saying, you know, what pitch is coming up? What's on your mind? What are you looking for here as a hitter? Because he's been there, and it's on his mind. That's his world. So he easily can answer the question. He said, well, I'm probably looking for some slider that's going to be low and away. He's going to try to get me to chase a bad ball. He came inside with a fastball to set up something low and away, or vice versa. So I would say, as you feel comfortable with your knowledge, Andrew, go ahead and go with it. If you're not sure, I would hold off.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's go next to Dylan Nichols. Hi, Dylan. What's your question for Pat?
Hi, John. Hi, Pat. Thank you for setting this all up. It's very interesting. My question for Pat is that, so a lot of obviously every baseball team has their play-by-play announcer, and oftentimes we see that those guys will move on. Like Don Orsillo, he went from the Red Sox to the Padres. You went from, and those are 2 separate teams, 2 separate conferences and whatnot. You went from the Milwaukee Brewers to the Cubs. Was there any sort of problems in moving to a team that is a division rival of the team that you used to be calling for?
Great question, Dylan. Now they are division rivals. Actually, when I got the job way back in 1996, Milwaukee was still in the American League. They joined the National League in 1998. But I was familiar with them, and I'll tell you what was really a challenge for me was going from one of the smallest markets in baseball, Milwaukee, to one of the biggest, Chicago. Now, that was a huge transition. And I went from working solo in Milwaukee. Bob Uecker was the lead broadcaster, and it was his format. And, you know, he worked solo, so the other guy worked solo. But in Chicago, they always have a 2-man team. And my new partner was going to be Ron Santo, so that was a transition. But it all worked out. You have to and here's good advice, Dylan. If you ever go from one place to another, the new audience does not really want to hear too much about your old place and your old team. They want to hear about the team you're covering right now, because that's the audience. In my case, it was the audience of the Chicago Cubs. That's what they want to hear about. They don't want to hear a lot of stories about Milwaukee or anything about the Brewers. Occasionally you can do it, but I would be very careful and focus 99.9% on your home audience.
Our final question for Pat, our final question for the summit, comes from Matt Sossler. Matt, thank you, man. Go ahead and launch your question to Pat.
Hi, my name is Matt Sossler. I am currently a freshman at Ithaca College, where I've done play-by-play for the women's basketball team, in addition to being the pre, half, and post host for several other sports. I'm also going to be the play-by-play announcer for the Pure Trappers, hopefully, if things work out. this summer. They're in the Expedition League. I'm also from the north side of Chicago. Go Cubs. My question is when games get out of hand, like when it's 11-0, 15-0, and things really seem dry, and that happens for multiple games in a row, how well or how much do you prepare in terms of extra stories based on the opponent and predicting what the score is going to be like?
That's the challenge, Matt. That's a great question. I would say, for one thing, I keep a big file on this date in baseball history. And you can always go back on this date in baseball history. Lou Gehrig hit for the cycle for the Yankees way back in 1928. In 1948, Bob Feller struck out 17 members of the Yankees on this day, or whatever. So baseball history is always pertinent. If it's a close game, you don't bother with the history because the action on the field is riveting, and it's a 3-2 ball game, and you don't really need to deviate. But when it is, like you say, 11-0, and it's the fifth inning, and you got to be on the air for another 90 minutes, you do have to go to Plan B. Plan B could be storytelling. It could be being silly and having fun without being outrageous and ridiculous, because you want to keep your audience. I always tap into Ron Coomer. I tell people also, if you want to go into baseball announcing, you had better love the game because of the scenario you just described. You have a lot of blowouts. You have a team that's going to lose 100 games. Sure, it's a job, but you roll your sleeves up and you go to work. You are working every single day. It's not easy, but you have to do whatever you can to try to keep the audience. Storytelling, having fun, you're still calling play-by-play, and you're trying, here's another thing I try to do, try to find something positive from the team you're covering each day. Even though they're getting blown out, true, but the shortstop, the young guy, Nico Horner, he had 3 hits, and he made a couple of nice plays on defense, so you can talk about that. Sometimes it's difficult. If the team is really bad, and I've covered some bad teams, it gets harder to find the good stuff, but that's part of your job. And I would say have fun, just keep it going. Don't get negative. Don't be ripping the players, but just report the game. You don't have to make excuses. When the team is down 11-0, you know they're having a bad day, and you don't really have to belabor that fact.
John Chalesnik again, thank you so very much for participating in this, for your graciousness, but also your tenacity in working through all the technical stuff to get on. Appreciate it so very much. Thank you.
John, you're welcome, and thank you. I think this is a great thing you're doing. This is excellent. I wish when I was a kid there would have been some kind of a Zoom conference like this.
Yeah, Zoom conferences are pretty darn cool. I wish I had stock in the company. They're doing all right right now.
Trivia question before I go.
Yeah.
Who sang the song, Who's Zoomin' Who?
Oh, I know that. It's Aretha Franklin.
What year for bonus points?
I was in high school. I'm going to go 1983. No, later than that. I'm going to go. Oh no, you're right. It could be 80. Okay, I'm going to say 83. I started going to my college years. Yeah, I'm going to say 84. What is it? What's
1988. But you did great, and you get a lovely home version. Nice going, John.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Pat.
guys.
Appreciate you. Go Cubs.
Thanks. I appreciated it, guys. Thank you for all the great questions.